At times, we are absolutely enamored by the concept of a two-sport athlete. One of the most talked about coaches in modern college football spent time with both the Atlanta Falcons and the Atlanta Braves at the same time. Bo Jackson won a Heisman playing his number 2 sport, and Jameis Winston won a Heisman playing his number 1 sport. Charlie Ward won a Heisman playing his better sport, football, but ended up with a lengthy career in the NBA after getting blackballed from the NFL. That's not even mentioning all the football players who duel as track athletes. Recently, I was doing some research on the precipitous fall of former Clemson/Oregon State/Florida State quarterback DJ Uiagalelei, who, after a genuinely awful senior year at Florida State, went undrafted and signed with the NFL's Chargers. He was a legitimately talented football player coming out of high school, but also was considered a top baseball recruit, and reportedly would have been a top selection there had he chosen baseball over football. He was actually drafted by the Dodgers in the 20th round of the 2023 MLB draft despite having not played baseball since high school. Obviously, this raises the question. If DJU had chosen baseball out of high school, would he have had a better career there instead of with football? The fun thing about hypotheticals, as I'm sure you already know with me, is that it's an excuse to get as weird and as wrong as possible. Because the butterfly effect says that nearly anything is possible as a result of changing one small thing in the past, every prediction about what would have happened is every bit as incorrect as it is correct. A 24-year-old DJU could be dealing for the Mets right now, or he could have faded out and gone back to football as an older freshman anyway. Who knows? But this question always lends itself to some other players who chose different paths coming out of high school. And, as a Royals fan who lives in Kansas, there's always one guy that comes to mind. Now, I get pigeonholed as a football channel a lot. That makes sense. A lot of my videos are on college conferences, and football drives the realignment bus, but I don't like to think of myself as a football channel. Look at my description. I can talk about whatever I want. Someday I'll make a video that isn't about sports. I might make one about a tornado, or about Steve Irwin, or about the Mythbusters. Today, I'm making a video about a Kansan and a choice. And it all starts with high school recruits. In terms of recruiting, the state of Kansas tends to get a bad rap. And that's entirely unfair to Kansas and the kids who come out of there, because there are some legitimately good football players that come from Kansas. Barry Sanders famously grew up in Wichita, and both KU backs Gale Sayers and John Riggins stayed in-state. K-State had Darren Sproles, who hailed from Olathe. Breece Hall was born in Nebraska, but the star Cyclone back played football in Wichita. Even outside the running back position, the state has produced some of the greatest players in the history of college football entirely under the radar. Will Shields and Jordy Nelson from Riley, Terrence Newman from Salina. If you want to go even more recent, we can definitely do that too. Malik Collins, KCK, Shane Ray, Overland Park, Braden Smith, Olathe, AJ Epinesa, Oak Park, Isaiah Simmons, Olathe, Cody Whitehair, Abilene. And that's just northeast Kansas. But where it gets weird is at the quarterback position. Kansas is weirdly really good at producing college quarterbacks. The most prolific of the QBs to come from Kansas is former Purdue Boilermaker Jim Everett from Emporia. After being, at the time, the greatest quarterback to ever play for Purdue, he was drafted 3rd overall by the Rams in 1986 and played in the NFL for over 10 years. John Hadel was born in Lawrence and stayed there to play for KU. He'd eventually be drafted by the Chargers in 1962 and throw for over 33,000 career yards. Lynn Dickey, Billy Kilmer, Sean Hill. Kansas makes some pretty good QBs, and the state has continued to produce quarterbacks. There was a reason why K-State was excited to keep the commitment of Mays' Avery Johnson in-state. Recent high-profile quarterbacks from Kansas don't typically stay there. 4-star QB Graham Mertz left Mission, Kansas to sign with the Wisconsin Badgers in 2019. 2009 5-star Blake Bell signed with Oklahoma. The last 4-star quarterback before them to come from Kansas was Nick Patton from Winfield, who did sign with K-State and did nothing. He moved to wide receiver and ended up at Dodge City Community College before fading out of football entirely. Ignoring Patton, who didn't take a snap at K-State, here's a list of every 4-star or greater college quarterback in at least the last 20 years to have come from Kansas and their college productions. For all the QBs to come from Kansas, not many are 4 stars or greater. Here I've created a rudimentary and admittedly awful set of points to determine the performance of each of them. Obviously at the top of the list is Avery Johnson, the youngest here, but with only 1 year of full-time starting experience. Following that is Graham Mertz, who's played college ball for 6 years between Wisconsin and Florida. And then there's Blake Bell, who switched positions halfway through his Oklahoma career to tight end to help utilize his massive size better. In order to determine the performance score, I've taken their touchdowns minus their interceptions and plus their passing yards, dividing that by 100 to put it in the range of other statistics. Now, obviously, Graham Mertz leads the way by a healthy margin due to the simple fact that he's played more football than anyone else on this list, and Blake Bell suffers a lot because he simply stopped playing quarterback after a couple years and didn't even get good playing time when he was a QB because he was stuck behind Landry Jones. So to make it a little more fair, I've taken each of their scores and divided it by the years they played quarterback. Avery and Blake by 2, Graham by 6. That gives us a little bit of a better view of their productivity at the position, even if it is a huge oversimplification. But there's one more quarterback on that list. The class of 2011's own, Bubba Starling. This needs context. Let's get some. Bubba, born Derek, was from Gardner, a town of under 20,000 people in 2010, and attended Gardner Edgerton High School, which is a weird combination of schools between the towns of Gardner, Edgerton, and western chunks of Olathe. Like so many high school athletes in Kansas, Bubba played multiple sports for the Trailblazers. During the winters, he took part in the state's pastime of basketball and was apparently pretty good at it, given his incredible athleticism and frame at 6'5", 190 pounds. But his bread and butter came with two sports: baseball and football. Let's start with baseball. As an outfielder, Bubba was compared to players like Josh Hamilton and Carl Crawford, hitting over half the balls pitched to him and with 4 home runs, 10 RBIs, and 7 stolen bases as a senior. High school players in Kansas typically play all over the place on the field, so he didn't just play outfield, he also pitched some. No, look, he can also hit 94 on the gun. That's normal. But he was also dealing at the start of the year playing quarterback. Earlier that year, he helped lead Gardner to an 11-1 record, throwing for 812 yards and 8 touchdowns, while also rushing for 2,471 yards and 31 touchdowns. Most schools in 2010 Kansas ran the quarterback as their primary form of offense, but this was just absurd. Bubba Starling wasn't just the best recruit in the country in baseball, he was one of the best in football, too. 24/7 Sports had him ranked as the second best football recruit in the state, behind only defensive tackle Jordan Phillips, and the 7th best dual-threat quarterback in the country, behind Jeff Driscoll, Braxton Miller, Brett Hundley, and Teddy Bridgewater. He was in front of some other scrubs, too. I can't remember their names, though. Oh well, his high school career inevitably led to a crossroads. His size, athleticism, and toughness immediately earned him a bevy of football offers. He spurned the 2 in-state schools, though, and decided to shrink his list to 2 during his senior year, deciding between the ravenous fan base of Nebraska or the hallowed halls of Notre Dame. Both these schools were the only ones that would let him play both football and baseball collegiately. When it came time to choose, he stuck closer to home with the Cornhuskers, excited to play in front of fans that he thought were, quote, nuts. No, Bubba, they're not nuts. They're corn. But at the end of the day, it wouldn't matter. But let's speculate for a second about what Bubba's career at Nebraska would have looked like had he decided to play football in 2011. As a run-first bruiser with some good throwing ability, he reminds me a lot of Jameis Winston coming out of high school. Both were the same height and weight as a high school prospect, and both were ranked somewhat similarly in their respective classes. Both would have ended up playing baseball and football for their respective schools. But, like Jameis, I'd expect for Bubba to grow into his position as a quarterback. The 2011 Nebraska Cornhuskers quarterback room consisted of sophomore Taylor Martinez as the starter, who wasn't going to be overtaken, and then some other guys who would never play. Redshirt freshman Brian Carnes was generally considered to be the backup, and he did throw a couple passes for the Huskers in 2011. Ron Kellogg would take a few snaps in 2012, but when Taylor Martinez left the team in 2013, the heir apparent was already on roster: freshman Tommy Armstrong. Now, would Nebraska have been able to sign Armstrong if they were ready to go with a 6'5" redshirt sophomore who was reportedly faster and stronger than Armstrong was? Maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe they'd be more comfortable throwing Bubba out there and seeing what they had as a backup. Maybe Bubba would end up following a career arc like Jameis did. Maybe, in 2013 or 2014, he ends up in Kansas City anyway. But for the Chiefs, not the Royals. What does that do to the NFL? Whoa, that's enough speculation. Back to what actually happened. The Kansas City Royals were building something special in 2011. In general, the Royals hadn't been very good for a very long time. This wasn't for lack of trying. The Royals hadn't been back to the playoffs once in the 25 years after their 1985 World Series victory over the cross-state St. Louis Cardinals. They'd had some seasons where they got close to making the playoffs, like in 1989 and 2003, but for the most part, they weren't able to get over the hump in a middling AL Central. Guys like Brett Saberhagen and Carlos Beltran were top-tier players at their position, but would eventually leave KC when it became clear they weren't going to make it back to the World Series anytime soon. By 1999, the Royals had become a joke. Pop quiz: how many teams are there in the AL Central? Got your answer? Well, if you guessed 5, you would be right. Now look at how many times you see a number 5 from 2001 to 2010. In 10 years, the Royals finished last in their division 6 times. This consistent failure did give them plenty of opportunities to stockpile talent, though. The rules of the MLB draft, held in the middle of the season for some reason, dictated back in 2011 that team order was determined by placement. Since the Royals were awful, they picked early a lot over that decade. As is tradition in baseball, some prospects turned out and some didn't. But the Royals got their hands on quite a few good ones. In 2002, they picked Zach Greinke, who last pitched for the Royals just a few years ago and is one of the most beloved players in the team's history, despite spending the majority of his career elsewhere. 2004's first-round selection, Billy Butler, became a fan-favorite DH for the team and earned himself the all-time great baseball nickname of Country Breakfast. Alex Gordon, Luke Hochevar, Mike Moustakas, and Eric Hosmer formed a nucleus that eventually became one of the strongest in the sport. And eventually, it started to turn them around. We know how that story ends. But in 2011, they were still struggling. The Crowns finished 67-95 in 2010 and fired their manager, Trey Hillman, early in the season, bringing in former Brewers manager Ned Yost to the skipper's chair. The only hope to be found at Kauffman Stadium was nowhere in sight of it at all. It was in Omaha, or Arkansas, somewhere in their farm system. In fact, the Royals' 2010 farm system was ranked 10th in the league. And they had their eyes on the perfect guy to supplement it, playing high school ball just 37 miles away.
The dream scenario for Royals fans and the town of Gardner came true tonight. Justin Unell is here with details. And Justin, you were excited in the newsroom tonight.
Bubba Starling played at Gardner Edgerton High School, just 45 minutes away from the home of the Royals. Now Starling has been drafted with the 5th overall pick by his hometown team.
The Royals selected Bubba 5th overall in the 2011 MLB draft, and he chose the MLB over Nebraska. His first season in the Royals farm system was 2012, where he made his start with the Burlington Royals of A-ball. Now is a good time to talk about the average career of a first-round pick in the MLB. According to Baseball America, around 76% of high school outfielders drafted in the first round of the draft make the MLB. This seems astronomically low, but it's higher than any other round. According to Fangraphs, the average time it takes for the first overall pick to make the big leagues is 3.6 years. With every pick after that, the time is extended by 0.07 years, or just about 25 days. So, as the 5th overall pick, Bubba theoretically should make the Royals in around 4 seasons, or 3.95 years, making him on the roster for the 2015 season. Let's start the clock on Bubba. Year 1, 2012 with the rookie ball Burlington Royals. He hit .275 with 10 home runs and 33 RBIs in 53 games. He moved up to A-ball with the Lexington Legends in 2013, hitting .241 with 13 home runs and 63 RBIs in 125 games. Year 3, 2014 with the High A Wilmington Blue Rocks. Bubba hits .218 with 9 home runs and 54 RBIs in 132 games. That's not great. He needs to be exceeding at a high level if he's going to make that MLB roster by the 2015 season, and he's struggling at A-ball. There are 2 more levels above this, and he can't even crack that ceiling. Bubba does crack the AA roster in 2015, hitting .269 with 12 home runs and 44 RBIs, but he can't make that MLB roster. The Kansas City Royals win the World Series. In doing so, they lose many of their prospects in trading for pieces to help them compete as a small market team with the other teams in the MLB. In July, they traded a handful of pitchers to the Reds for Johnny Cueto and sent Sean Manaea and Aaron Brooks to Chicago for Ben Zobrist. Both players were pivotal pieces of that World Series run, but they drained the talent of the farm system. The Royals farm system would go from 10th in 2010 to 22nd in 2016. Bubba was still there. The coaching got worse, and since it's the farm system, so did the players. He was trapped. He was added to the team's 40-man roster in 2015, meaning he could have been brought up to the MLB level, but he didn't. He went to AAA Omaha in 2016, and 2017, and 2018. It wasn't until halfway through the 2019 season at the age of 26 that Bubba finally made his appearance at the MLB level. 8 years into his MLB career, and 4 years later than when he theoretically should have ended up in Kansas City. Despite his prolonged odyssey from North Carolina to Kentucky to Delaware to Arkansas to Nebraska to Idaho for a little bit, Royals fans were still optimistic to see him play. Whit Merrifield was maybe the best player on the Royals at the time, and he made his rookie debut late as well. But it just wasn't meant to be for Bubba. The Royals fell off a cliff after 2015. They went 81-81 in 2016 and missed the playoffs. They fell to 80-82 in 2017 and 58-104 in 2018. When Bubba arrived in 2019, the team went 59-103. There just wasn't much he could do to wield him the victory. And he didn't do much anyway. He went .215 at the plate in 56 games as a rookie and regressed to .169 in 2020. He was released, re-signed with the Royals minor league, and after playing for Team USA in the 2021 Olympics, retired from baseball forever.
Some people don't know how tough baseball really is. Not only you can be physically gifted as you want to be, but most of it's mental. And when I first came out of high school, I didn't really know that. So it took me the amount of years now to finally get here. I matured. I've went through a lot of struggles, but I think those struggles are the person that has made me be the player today.
He didn't even live up to his own expectations. But this sort of self-prophesying quote he had when he was first called up is applicable in other ways. When he hung up the cleats and retired from baseball in 2021 at just 28 years of age, I don't think there was any sense of regret or looking back in it. He got his chance. He played. He did all he could with the cards he was given. And I really don't think for a single moment he wondered how it all would have been different if he'd chosen football. Change the word player with man. Here's a kid who was drafted at 18 by his hometown team and chose those colors over a career in a different sport. He was pressured immediately by a fan base of a team that was on its way to winning a World Series and to becoming a savior for them. And through no fault of his own because of a faltering farm system, the pressure of that need to be a savior only grew the longer he did take the field. When he finally did, it was for a team that looked nothing like the organization that drafted him. He was released and still chose to stay, and then had the opportunity to play for his country and then hung it up. The sheer fact that he didn't implode under the emotional stress and tenor of all that hints towards a young man who developed an insanely strong sense of self-worth and a recognition that, at the end of the day, it is so much bigger than baseball. Call him a bust. He doesn't care. We can wonder how his football career would have gone, and he doesn't care about that either. He made it. He won. I don't know what the purpose of this video is, to be honest with you, other than that predicting how a player's career would have gone if they chose another sport is oftentimes a fruitless effort. And really, does it matter? If you ask them, they probably chose the sport they like more, and they probably enjoyed their career more, even if it didn't go as they planned. Sports are unimportant by nature. They're children's games played by adults and watched by people who are bored. But I love them. Players love them. And given that you're here, you probably do too. Have a good one.